Good afternoon and welcome to this Lyft driver COVID-19 vaccine webinar. My name is Marcus D. Weems and I have the honor to serve as your driver advocacy community lead. I manage our driver advisory council program here at Lyft. I, like many of you on this call, started as a Lyft driver in 2013 in Chicago. I have been impressed by our Lyft driver community since our founding and even in challenging times such as 2020. Drivers have been resilient and continue to show care for one another. Today, I am pleased that you have joined me on this webinar as we invite Dr. Chris Tang, who serves as Medical Director for CareOnSite. We've asked Dr. Tang to provide an update on how the vaccines work, their effectiveness, and answer questions frequently asked by you, our drivers. I will now turn it over to Dr. Tang, and at the end of this presentation, I will ask him a few of our top questions submitted by drivers. Dr. Tang, the floor is all yours.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and I appreciate your time. I think a big part of today is just to promote vaccine transparency. Something that's really important for me is to frame out why we make the decisions that we do and the reasons behind that. So it's so important to empower you with the right information. What I'm summarizing today is the most up-to-date information. You obviously have to stay updated through this emerging, evolving situation, and the CDC and WHO are always the best sources of that. But I'm going to try to sum up everything best I can today. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the questions. Next slide, please. I always like to give a status update on the pandemic and where we're at, because why we make decisions should be based on reason, should be based on medicine, should be based on personal belief. I pulled up some sources from Harvard and Johns Hopkins, which are the some of the, people consider the preeminent academic institutions. And in the top left, I showed the risk level by county in the United States about a month ago. And where it's red, it's classified by the number of new COVID cases per 100,000 people. We were in big trouble as a country about a month ago, and it wasn't looking very pretty. As a lot of you know, we have drivers spread out across the nation. Different hospital systems were overwhelmed, and I'm 100% sure we all know someone who got COVID, and many may have recovered, and unfortunately, some may have had very, very rough clinical courses. I want to fast forward to today. Within the past few weeks, we've made a lot of strides. We've come out of this third wave, and the numbers of positive cases have dropped drastically. And that's actually great news. It actually makes me really happy. A little bit about just myself and my background is I actually have been playing in this COVID world since late 2019, working with some multinational organizations in their Asia operations when it outbroke in Asia. And I never knew that I would be dealing with this day in and day out since March of 2020 in America. And to see us go through these waves is very painful, but I'm very hopeful now because we have the vaccine and we're starting to learn a lot more about how to prevent the illness from spreading. And looking at it too, to frame out where we're at as a country, we've gone through over 500,000 deaths, okay? That's a staggering number. And when someone asked me about 6 months ago whether we'd go over 250,000, I said, I don't think so, from one of our nurses. His name was Dakota. And now we have about almost 12% of our population vaccinated, a lot of doses administered, and hopefully we can see deaths start to tail off. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the death and morbidity and mortality in the next slide. Could you help Marcus with the next slide, please? Thank you. And as we come out of this and we see the numbers decreasing, it's still important to frame out the number of deaths that have hit and how it's been the #1 killer in America actually since the week of 12/4 in 2020. And ever since I finished medical school, heart disease, heart attack, and cancer have been the #1 killers in America. And since December of 2020, it has been the #1 killer in America every week. And actually, I'm very hopeful as I see those numbers tail off in new positive cases. I believe that hopefully by the end of March, we will be out of COVID being the #1 killer in America. And we're going to get there, but we can get there together. And I want to talk a little bit about the vaccine to kind of frame that out. And no matter what age you are as a driver, know that there is risk, or as members of the community, there is risk. We always hear, hey, it's the sick and the old that are dying from this. There are also some young people. So I wanted to put in the bottom, just to frame this, this has affected everyone throughout society, a little bit differently, but whether you're young or old, there is a chance for death. And we can take measures to help prevent that for ourselves, but also to actually really help those around us. And I'm going to share with you why and what I mean by that. Okay, so hopefully I framed up the situation with where we are as a pandemic. And Marcus, thank you for bringing the next slide. Let's talk about the vaccine, how it works, what it is. Okay, let's see if we can, empower all of us to make the right decisions for ourselves and our communities. You've heard a lot about Pfizer and Moderna. Those are the two shots that are widely distributed right now that most people who've gotten it have access. What is this mRNA vaccine stuff? When I actually heard about the vaccine development, and I was actually blown away by how fast they were going to develop it. And I was a little bit scared, but then I read a little bit more about it. I learned about it. mRNA vaccine technology is not completely new. Okay, it's been used at the past, but not on a widespread scale. A lot to do with the vaccines that they developed with mRNA in the past already had successful treatments or a successful vaccine. So they really didn't push the development of it. But COVID presented a new challenge. We had to develop something very quickly, have it be able to adjust, and have it move through a clinical trials process that we could evaluate scientifically. So we went forward to develop and hone out this technology that had been there in the past, and no corners were cut in the clinical trials. I had no idea that Pfizer was going to have over 40,000 people in their cohort to really follow to make sure the vaccine worked. The Moderna, they had over 30,000 people, very, very large cohorts that I've never seen before for a vaccine in such a short time to give us the power to make the right recommendations. Something that really tells me that they're following the advice very carefully is we know that some groups are approved, but my kids are not approved yet. The data isn't there that it's safe and effective for that group. I think they're going to get there. They're just not there yet, but they're releasing information in stages because it's based on science. So there was nothing cut in the approvals process. And as you know, not all the vaccines have been approved in America. And Johnson & Johnson was recently approved, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But there were no big cuts. I did want to talk about what mRNA is, because a lot of confusion and fear, and a lot of it stems from not knowing what mRNA may be. But mRNA is actually a messaging system that our own body uses every single day. Okay, our cells use mRNA to make proteins. It's a messaging system that already exists in our body. Okay, and how did we leverage this power? What they did is, and I have this little drawing in the top right. I know it's rudimentary, but I love it because I think it's simple and effective in explaining how the vaccine works. Is we take the mRNA, and it's a message that we put into our arm, and that message goes to our cells. And the cell makes a protein that is unique to the surface of the coronavirus. Okay, it's only on the surface of the coronavirus. It's nowhere else. It's very, very specific. It doesn't have us make the whole virus. It just makes this this protein that's very unique. Very similar to how our body may use mRNA to make another protein that is indigenous to our body. And when our body sees this spike protein, it recognizes that it's abnormal, and we make the antibodies to fight coronavirus, okay? And these antibodies are inside of us. So if COVID infects us, we can immediately attack it. And we attack it so that it is not effective in invading our cells or causing significant disease. I'm going to share with you the data on that a little bit later. But it's so important because it doesn't prevent the virus from landing on us. It doesn't prevent exposure. But when it does, we immediately have the weapons to fight it, rather than waiting for the virus to infect us, replicate, get into tons of our cells, cause damage, and then our body has that 5 to 10 days to even ramp up building antibodies. We have it already, okay? And this has actually been shown in the studies to be so effective at preventing hospitalization and death. So hopefully I was able to shed a little bit of light on mRNA. It's a messaging system that our body already uses. Our scientists have leveraged the ability to use that message for our body to make the spike protein without the virus infecting us or damaging our cells. And we make the antibody so that if it lands on us, we destroy it before it can replicate or invade our cells in a significant manner. Okay, and what we're feeling when we have these side effects is the vaccine triggering an inflammatory response, right? You heard of people who get a sore arm or fevers or chills. That's the inflammatory response of our body making antibodies. And I actually have had both shots. I'll share with you my personal experiences. For the first one, I got a really sore arm. Actually, the sorest arm I've ever had from any vaccine. And everyone is different. If you don't get a sore arm, that doesn't mean it didn't work. It's just we all respond differently. So the second shot, I got fevers and chills for 24 hours. I felt like I'd been at the gym, at the squat rack, exercising. When I stepped out of bed the next day, I felt like I'd been working out, but it went away in 24 hours. But I was really happy though. Inside, I was like, wow, the vaccine worked. I'm making antibodies. I am really lucky because I'm pretty confident now that I'm not going to end up in a hospital and I'm not going to end up dying. And the outcomes and those endpoints are what I feel is most important. I've had a lot of crazy questions about mRNA altering our DNA. Is it going to attack other things? Remember, mRNA is just a messaging system, and it's very specific. It doesn't enter the nucleus. It does not insert itself into our DNA. It is strictly to make this protein that is very unique to the virus, and it gives us the ability to develop antibodies very quickly, to protect ourselves and also diminish the risk of spread. So hopefully this sheds a little bit of light on how the vaccine works and what mRNA actually is. Could I get the next slide, please, Marcus? Thank you. And this to me is actually probably the most powerful slide in the whole presentation today. This is a slide from a physician at Brown. It's one of the academic centers in the United States. And they were able to look at large cohorts of people who got the vaccine. And regardless of the vaccine, whether it was Moderna, Pfizer, or J&J, and we're just going to stick to those because those are the ones that are approved in America because we went through that regulatory process to approve what was safe, you see 0 hospitalizations, 0 people who died from COVID, and 0 people who died from the vaccine. And that to me is the primary endpoint. That is so powerful. You are protecting yourselves and your family members, okay? As far as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we're gonna see more of this coming out. And I recommend all 3 vaccines, okay? I think looking at the primary endpoints is most important, but sometimes the information that's been released is a little bit not clear. And what I mean by that is you've heard that Johnson & Johnson may be 66% effective, whereas Moderna and Pfizer are 95% effective. You're like, wow, why would I want Moderna? Why would I want Pfizer? Well, they were compared at very different times too. You have to think about Johnson & Johnson was tested when we have these variants of the virus out. It was tested in areas internationally with the South African variant, with the Brazilian variant. And we now preliminary think that the Moderna and Pfizer are not as effective against those variants, although there is some effect. And even Moderna is developing a booster shot right now for the South African variant. So the percentages don't show that the tests and trials were done at different times. So I want to keep to frame that out, that it's not a clear apples to apples comparison. But what we go back to is look at this slide. It is really preventing hospitalizations and death. And that is so powerful. How long will the vaccine be protective? Right now, we're saying 3 to 6 months. And I think it's probably going to be longer. Obviously, there's variability because of the variants, and we'll see how effective they are against them as the variants form. But you have to remember, we can only say what we have science to back up. And we only have 3 to 6 months of good data from people who got the vaccine and then moving forward in time to share that information with you all. So right now it looks for 3 to 6 months. It does not prevent you from getting COVID. Okay, it does not prevent you from getting COVID. The virus can still land on you. But what I can confidently say is it is really, really good at keeping you out of the hospital and keeping you out of the ground so that we can be on the right side of the grass, the next day. Will people who get the vaccine be contagious? We don't know 100% that answer. We do know that the vaccine decreases the viral load or viral replication, because remember, the antibody attacks the virus, doesn't allow it to invade our cells or replicate as effectively as it could. So that viral burden in individuals is much lower. So I can confidently say that the risk of transmitting the virus is going to drop, but I don't believe it drops to zero. For example, if the virus lands on me and I've had the vaccine, I may not be clinically ill, but there may be a few copies in my mouth, and if I lick the eyeball of my friend next to me, I potentially may be getting him sick. But that's why we still have the protective measures. That's why we're still masking and distancing and taking the right precautions. So although the ability to be contagious, I believe, is decreased significantly, it is not zero. I was asked to speak about pregnancy a little bit, just for clarity. As far as the vaccine, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology has recommended the vaccine. Okay, for both pregnant females and lactating females. I think last time I checked, there was a small subset of pregnant females with autoimmune disease that they did not recommend the vaccine in, but overall it is recommended for that group. If you fall into this population, I do believe it's a personal decision. That's the goal of today's talk, to provide clarity and transparency, to talk to your OB. Ask them the questions, and I'm sure that they'll have a good answer for you, and also take into consideration your own personal beliefs and concerns. As far as contraindications, there are contraindications if you've had anaphylaxis to the first dose of the vaccine, or if you have anaphylaxis to any of the ingredients of the vaccine. And instead of sitting here and going over all the ingredients in the vaccine, what I recommend is if you've had any reaction, anaphylaxis or significant allergic reaction to a vaccine or any medication or any specific food, ask your doctor, and you can go over that list to see if there may be anything that poses a danger to you. But just keep in mind that even though we've given this vaccine out, we don't have anyone yet who definitively died from the vaccine. So even for the individuals who went through anaphylaxis, we actually have a protocol for giving the vaccine that helps take into consideration this risk and how to treat it. Okay. Should you get the vaccine if you've already had COVID? Absolutely. Okay. This vaccine is unique in the sense that it produces a greater antibody response to protect you than actually getting the virus. And the second part of it that I think is really important is the fact that there are variants going around, and the variants may pose a different risk to people who already got the virus. And I believe, looking at the data from the vaccination studies, there is at least partial effect against some of these variants, and we'll know more as we move through this and gather the data. But that is another reason to get the vaccine, is there is probably going to be some protective factor against the variants. Side effects. I hate calling them side effects because it gives it such a bad name. bad connotation. But it is a reaction, and you can see anything from a sore arm to chills to fever. These are natural side effects or reactions that the body is going through an immune response and producing the antibody. So don't be surprised. I wouldn't be afraid of those. I see that as a natural part of producing the antibodies in a subset of the population. And then the last one, does getting the vaccine allow me to change my behavior? And I know you've probably read about some of the CDC recommendations that people are fully vaccinated, meaning 14 days outside their second shot for the Moderna or Pfizer, or 14 days out from the J&J, can mingle with other people who are fully vaccinated. It sounds like a very reasonable approach to me. I think in society right now, there's still a lot of people who are not vaccinated. And from a medical perspective, that's why I'm still wearing a mask, even though I'm fully vaccinated. I'm at the office right now, and as respect to the people around me, I feel it's important to wear a mask, okay? And to protect myself, because every time we prevent the spread of this virus, we're also diminishing the effects or development of variants, okay? And I'm going to chat about that in a sec. So let's go to the next slide if we could, Marcus. And I just want to talk about variants and changing behavior, because as we go through this, a variant is formed every single time there's a mutation as the virus replicates. So the more it replicates within a society, within a community, within our global environment, there's a chance for a new variant to form. And that's why right now, when I think about how far we've come and we've gone through this third wave, I want to take every opportunity I have to really decrease the ability for new variants to form. And these behaviors of distancing, wearing masks, washing hands, that have been effective and have been proven to be some of the most effective protective mechanisms, can help diminish that development of the variants. Taking the vaccine, you are attacking the virus before it can replicate efficiently. You're taking an active role in decreasing the risk for variants. So these UK variants, South African variant, Brazilian variants, there's variants in the United States too that haven't been clearly identified. We are decreasing the risk for new variants, and what I see is moving us back closer to our norm, closer to where we can be back a year and a half ago, not thinking about all of these things that have drastically changed all of our lives. So the variance is a game changer that we don't fully understand yet, but it also emphasizes the importance of our behaviors as a society, and also represents how important the vaccines are to diminish viral replication. So to kind of cap this off, why should you take the vaccine? We need to protect ourselves, number one, and that's as a medical provider, as a dad, as a son, I want to protect myself, but I also want to protect others, because if the virus can't replicate within me, there's a diminished chance that I infect those around me, and that's really important to me as a person, to protect my mom, my dad, because even for my age group, I'm probably lower risk of dying. Okay, I'm in my mid 40s. And I'm not on the high risk. I don't have any comorbids, but some of my family members do. And if I get it and I share it with them, I don't believe that I've done my job as a family member or as a member of the global community. So we're actually, in effect, protecting those around us by making a conscious decision to diminish the spread of the virus through whatever mechanisms we decide, and very similar to what we talked about with the vaccine and these preventative masking and distancing measures. Okay, and doing this will really get us to that herd immunity where the virus can't move freely throughout society, because a lot of us have been protected or already had the virus. And that is when we're probably going to start seeing further release of a lot of the recommendations that we have. And to sum this up, the risk of anaphylaxis, like we talked about, it looks like maybe 2 to 11 cases per 1 million doses. But what someone pointed out to me is the risk of COVID is so much greater, okay? We know COVID causes death. We know a lot of people with COVID have long-term outcomes. And even, for example, I recently read an article about this brain fog that people have after they get COVID and why they just don't think clearly. And some of the preliminary data from autopsies of people who've died found these types of cells called karyocytes that typically aren't found in the brain. And they found those in people and they think, well, maybe that's causing this fogginess. We don't totally understand what the vaccine may do to us in 10 years from now, in all transparency. But neither do we understand what the long-term effects are. But I also know that the short-term effects of COVID, if you're one of those individuals that it causes this massive inflammatory response, you're in bad shape. You end up in the hospital and you can die. The way that I see this is that the vaccination is the better of two unknowns. But I do know that the vaccine in the data definitely shows benefit, health benefit, and the protective benefit of me not ending up in the hospital. So I hope I was able to take some time today to share a little bit about the vaccines to really promote transparency so that you can make the decision for yourselves and your families whether it's the right one. I know that I got it. My wife, who's an academic physician, also got the vaccine. She got the Pfizer. I got the Moderna. You end up what you end up getting. And I am actually a huge proponent of all three based on the CDC recommendations and the data that's out there. Okay. And I think looking at it too, when I look at our leaders, and although not all of them have publicly said that they've gotten the vaccine, we start back from the presidents of Bush to Clinton, to Obama, to Trump, they all got the vaccine, every single one. The world leaders are getting the vaccine. The Pope actually got the vaccine. So when you look at it at this place, people that we hold near and dear who are leaders in our society, it may not always be publicized, but I know that all of them got the vaccine. And I think that them as individuals made that conscious decision to look at the data, look at the information, and decide that it was safe for them. So I hope that what we provided you today is powerful to move you along in that journey for you to make your decision. So I thank you again. And Marcus, could I hand this over to you to see if there's any questions?
Sure, Dr. Tang. Thank you very much for your insights and sharing that information with us. You talk about those leaders that we look up to and kind of aspire and think about. I was on Instagram the other day and saw that Dolly Parton even got her vaccine the other day. So I think it's very wise for all those on this call to take this information and make the best decision for yourselves and sign up when the time comes. But we do have a few questions from our driver community. Some of them you touched on during the call that I want to kind of like highlight again, if you can. Can you talk a little bit about what is the difference? You talked about how your wife had one vaccine and you had the other, right? And so what's the difference between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine that's currently being administered here in the US?
Okay, the Moderna and Pfizer are both mRNA vaccines. Okay, they actually both use the exact same technology. And I would say that they're just very similar. I think getting down to the nitty gritty is probably a trade secret that I don't even have access to. Okay, it comes down to little nucleotides in this messaging system that are probably a little bit different. But by and large, I would say they're very similar vaccines using the same technology, just probably a little bit differences in the best way that I could explain it would probably be Lego pieces. So, you have a Lego piece that's yellow, red, blue, and the vaccines and the messaging system have different colors of these Legos that move throughout. And there's probably a few differences in each one in how they manufacture a message for the protein, but ultimately both lead to the development of this antibody. So not a huge difference, same technology, very similar outcomes. I think just two companies that came to the same place, walking minorly different pathways, Marcus.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question a driver submitted. I'm a concerned driver about safety protocol and following CDC guidance, but I'm still on the fence about the vaccines because of potential side effects. What are the most common side effects?
Okay, and I definitely feel you, and I want to just thank the driver community also. I've taken Lyft on some of my travels around the United States. I still travel for work, and I've traveled through the pandemic, and just seeing what some of you have done, the concern. I've seen windows open, I've seen plastic barriers, I've seen you all wearing masks. So I want to thank you because the behaviors that I've seen have been awesome in each and every driver that I have been with. So thank you for that. As far as the most common side effects that I've seen is a sore arm, fever, chills, muscle aches. I think those are the most common that I've seen. Fatigue is also a very common one. And like I mentioned, anaphylaxis is a very, very rare one, but no one has died from it. And no one has died from these side effects. But we've had over 500,000 Americans die from COVID. And that to me is an instant decision maker in which direction I wanted to move for myself and my family. So yes, those are the most common side effects, but none of those side effects has ever killed anyone to my knowledge.
Great. Just because someone is vaccinated, does that mean that they cannot transmit the virus?
Okay, great question. I would say that it is greatly decreased. Your risk of transmitting the virus is greatly decreased because when you have the antibody, you're attacking that virus. You're killing it before it can effectively replicate or invade your cells. That does not mean that replication is zero because there's always one that gets away and it takes time for the antibody to take care of that one. So there's not a zero risk of transmission, but it's greatly decreased with the vaccine. And that's why we are still trying. My medical recommendation is still to wear the mask, still to practice hygiene standards, to really make that risk as close to zero as possible, Marcus. That's so important to me, to make that risk as close to zero, to decrease the risk of new variants so we can get back to norms within our communities and society. So it's not zero, greatly decreased. When we layer it with the masks and everything else, it can get darn close to zero, in my belief. And then you can make the personal decision from your family once you get vaccinated or your friends are fully vaccinated, how you want to manage your personal lives and your risk within gatherings in the household, right?
A driver submitted that they got their first vaccine last Saturday. Have you heard of anybody who have had the second vaccine? Should it be in the other arm or should it be in the same arm?
It can be in either arm, in my opinion. I took both of my left because I'm right-handed, so I want to leave my right arm good in case I have to raise my hand. So it can be in the same arm. It could be in the other arm, wherever you want it. I always do it in my non-dominant arm because I like keeping my right arm in good use. And the second thing too is once you get one dose, you have to, Moderna, you have to stick through with Moderna. I just want everyone to know that you have to stick. You shouldn't be jumping. Again, it goes back to the science. We want to make decisions based on science and data, and the protection and science says that you need to stick with the same dose. Okay.
Awesome. Well, that seems to be the end of the medical questions. We have a few questions that are more Lyft specific that I'll kind of try to answer here for the call. So the one question that we get a lot is, am I eligible? And like, who is eligible at this time to be vaccinated? As you know, Lyft has really tried to be at the forefront of getting drivers vaccinated as soon as possible, and that varies state by state. The vaccine is being distributed on a rolling basis, and not everyone will be eligible at the same time. Lyft has created an online resource. So if you go to lyft.com, click on COVID resources, and then click on driver, you'll be able to see up-to-date information on whether rideshare drivers in your state are eligible to receive the vaccine. Of course, you may qualify for the vaccine sooner under another category, and you can check your state's and also local Department of Health website for more information about eligibility. So another question is, do I need to show proof that I drive with Lyft when getting the vaccine? At your appointment, you may need to show proof that you drive with Lyft. While most states haven't identified exact requirements, you could be asked for documentation. One thing that we recommend is possibly your most recent earnings breakdown that you can get from your driver app as kind of your proof. Another question is, will I be penalized or prevented from driving with Lyft if I choose not to get the vaccine? No, not at this time. Lyft will not require you to get the vaccine in order to drive on the platform. So that kind of answers that question for you. As well, a question came in about, will Lyft riders be required to show proof of the vaccine in order to take a ride? The answer right now is no, we're not requiring drivers or riders to receive the vaccine in order to use the Lyft platform at this time. So we'll continue to update you as a driver community. So stay tuned. If you have more questions, again, visit lyft.com, click on COVID information, and then you click on for drivers for specific information. Once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Chris Tang for joining us today on this call, and we hope everyone a safe and healthy today and tomorrow, and stay educated about the vaccine. Have a good day, y'all. Thanks, Dr. Chris.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.